We'll go ahead and I'm going to sort of buy a little more time and go in through a little bit of an introduction here. One of the goals of this lecture series is to get you exposed to different industries, as well as to see things through the eyes or the perspective of a CEO. Now, none of you are going to walk out and become a CEO tomorrow unless for some reason were born with an extremely large silver spoon, and whoever in your family is willing to turn that over to you is ready to let that spoon probably go away, because that's probably not the smartest move he or she would do. So you're going to go out there, you're going to cut your teeth, it's going to take you time. But if you know and see things from the perspective of a CEO, it might help you navigate through those early parts of your career. The other thing is, I said we want to get you exposed to different industries, okay? Well, today we have an industry that's not probably something that most people would think that they leave from here to go into. But as you're going to see, things will change, your career paths will change, and I had dinner last night. I'm looking around, make sure I don't embarrass him, but I had dinner last night with one of the seniors in here, a finance major, who it's all set on being an investment banker. He's convinced that's what he wanted to do. Did his internship and said, let me rethink that, and went a different path. Has a great job lined up with the company that he internshiped with, but in a little bit different field. So be open to these ideas and concepts. Don't think I'm a finance major and therefore it's investment banking or bust. It's portfolio management or bust. You're going to see a finance major here very shortly from Mendoza. That's the CEO of a food co-op. All right. And on that note, I'll go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. Okay, so today our guest speaker is Mr. Chris Policinski. He's the president and CEO of the Land O'Lakes Incorporated. I'm sure you guys all know who that is. You've seen their products in the grocery store. They are the second largest cooperative in the nation, which does business in the U.S. and more than 50 countries, and has sales of over $15 billion. That's a lot of cheese and butter. Mr. Policinski has over 35 years of experience in the food industry. He joined Land O'Lakes in 1997 and was appointed the president and CEO in 2005. Prior to joining Land O'Lakes, he held leadership positions with the Kraft General Foods Company, Bristol-Myers Squibb, and the Pillsbury Company. Yes, Bristol-Myers Squibb, for most of you guys, is a pharmaceutical firm also. He is a member of board of directors of several industry associations, including the Grocery Manufacturers Association, the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives, and U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. He's involved in local community boards, such as the trustee of the University of Minnesota's Foundation, Carlson School Board of Advisors, and others. He is also a member of the board of directors for Xcel Energy, Hormel Foods, and Catholic Relief Services. So I'm sure he must know Dean Wu. Chris earned his, or I should say Carolyn Wu, former dean, Roger, I hope you didn't hear that. Yeah. Chris earned his MBA degree from NYU, and as I said, his undergraduate was from the University of Notre Dame as a finance major. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Chris Policinski. Please give him a warm welcome.
Dale, thank you very much for that nice introduction. It is great to be back at Notre Dame. Notre Dame has a special place in my heart and in the heart of my wife, Ann, who is here somewhere, who is also a Notre Dame graduate. So thank you for the introduction, and very importantly, thank you for the invitation today to come talk to you about Land O'Lakes. I've got a little over an hour, and what I want to do is basically three things, and then leave a fair amount of time for questions and answers. The first thing I want to do is tell you a little about Land O'Lakes, who we are, because we're probably not quite what you think, and what we're trying to achieve as a business. Along the way, I hope to tell you a story about corporate strategy, at least our version of corporate strategy, how we developed it, and how we're putting it into action. Importantly, though, I also want to tell you about a corporate purpose that we've discovered along the way, and how being a purpose-driven organization combined with a good strategy has really put our company on steroids. It's really supercharged engagement in our workforce, and it's supercharged our business performance. So the power of a good strategy aligned with a purpose-driven organization, is really, in my mind, one of the secrets to business success. When I'm done with that, I've been asked to share a little bit of my career experience that might be relevant to you. And last but not least, talk about what we at Land O'Lakes are looking for in our workforce, in folks who are at Land O'Lakes and in folks that we want to have come join Land O'Lakes. As I said, I want to leave plenty of time for questions, so please write down any questions you've got. Anything is fair game. It's a lot more interesting dialogue when we go back and forth, so I'm going to try and leave as much time as possible for questions. So on to Land O'Lakes and what our biggest business issue is. This might surprise you. When we think about our business, this is our biggest business issue, biggest challenge. We also think it's our biggest opportunity. We also think it's an obligation. How to feed the soon-to-be 10 billion people on the planet. I'll come back to this later, but the thumbnail is we've got 6.5 plus or minus billion people on the planet right now. In 2050, that number is going to be north of 9.5 billion, approaching 10. Roughly a 40% increase in population. Folks who study this day in, day out at the United Nations and other places say diets are improving because there's an emerging middle class in Asia and Africa that's going to go along with that population growth. And if you do the math of improving diets, where people mix more protein into their diet, and population growth, we are going to have to produce 70% more food between now and 2050. Now think about that. Just pause for a minute, because there are numbers and they kind of wash over you. But between now and 2050, basically between you and your age and me and my age, in the next 35 years, we're going to have to nearly double food production on this planet. It's taken us a long time to get to where we are. We have 35 years to double it. And oh, by the way, limited resources. There's 12% more arable land on the planet, and in reality, only about half of that can be brought into production, about 6%. And we've got a water crisis. In just the next decade, demand for water in total will outstrip supply by 40%. And that's not going to be even. There's going to be some drought areas that there's a tremendous imbalance, and then there's going to be areas that have plenty of water. But we have to nearly double food production in the next 35 years with very limited land and water. Now, I'll come back to this. I'm an optimist. I believe it can be done. We can produce more food in a more productive and sustainable way to feed 10 billion and beyond. And that starts to unlock our corporate strategy. By the way, you might say, that's an odd challenge and opportunity to talk about. First, as a company. And secondly, isn't that a social or political issue? You're right, it is a social and political issue. I believe having enough to eat is a basic human right. And I also tell you, and we see this in our global development business that I'll talk about later, folks who don't have enough food to eat do desperate things. So food security, when it's established, goes to economic stability, and when that's established, you get political stability. The gate swings the other way. So this is one of the grand challenges of our era, producing enough food in an increasingly sustainable way to feed the soon-to-be 10 billion people. I also think it's one of the great business opportunities of our era. It's not just a social or political problem, it's a business opportunity. Because I believe when we turn the power of business to society's most pressing issues, we can solve them better, faster, and smarter than with any other tool. So now let me talk about Land O'Lakes. Because right about now you're saying, what the heck are they so opinionated about feeding the planet for? They're the butter company. And that's how everybody thinks of us. Everybody thinks of Land O'Lakes as the butter company. And in fact, that's accurate. That perception is rooted in our history. We were formed in 1921 by a group of upper Midwest dairy farmers. Simple but powerful concept. Essentially, every city in the country, every city in the upper Midwest had a little creamery that took milk from their dairy farmers, and they put that perishable product into something that was stable, butter. The upper Midwest dairy creameries were producing butter from sweet cream, which was much better in quality and in taste than the butter produced in the population centers of the East Coast, which was butter from sour cream. Now, I wasn't around in 1921, but butter from sour cream does not sound like it tastes very good. The problem was, though, they had produced this high-quality product in the upper Midwest, but they were all these little individual creameries. They had no market power in the channel. So these dairy farmers said, what if we formed a marketing company, important point to come back to aggregate our supply, gain power in the channel, and sell our stuff more profitably than we can as individuals? Simple concept. I thank the founders of the company, the original management team, because they said initially, well, if we're going to stand for quality, we're going to be relentless about enforcing quality standards across our supply chain. Before the phrase network supply was developed, we indeed had a network supply chain. We had a lot of independently owned and operated businesses serving our branded goods need, and they enforced quality standards at the highest level. Well, the product from sweet cream, high uniform quality standards, was better than the alternative, and it was a smashing success. So just a few years after this big success, those same farmers in the upper Midwest, who were a lot more profitable as a result of this success, and growing because they were reinvesting in their business, said, what if we formed a company to aggregate our demand and bargain on our behalf to buy things cheaper than we could buy as individuals? So Land O'Lakes then became a company that aggregated the demand for this group of farmers and bought animal feed and crop inputs, seed and crop protection products. So, if you turn the clock forward now from the mid-20s to 2005, when I got this job, we were still a farmer-owned company, but we had wandered mightily. And these were the headlines you would read about Land O'Lakes. And they were challenging headlines. We were not performing as a company very well. And we spent most of our time as a management team talking about how we were going to serve our bankers and meet our baskets and caps and covenants, and how we were going to deal with our owners who weren't happy with our performance. So we were a company that had gotten to a certain size and scale over those 90 years plus or minus, but we had gotten there by collecting a lot of businesses beyond the core that I talked to you about. So we had a food business, Land O'Lakes Food, dairy products. We had a feed business, Land O'Lakes Feed, Purina Feed. We had a crop inputs business, a little business called Crop Plan Genetics that showed farmers how to grow things. But we also had, and you can see the list there, a sweet, wet flavorings company called Alex Freeze. We formulated all the products for Gatorade. Kind of an interesting business, and if you looked at the financial metrics, was our top performing financial business. We had an aseptic co-pack manufacturing business. That doesn't mean much to you, but what it was a business that made all the formulas for Slim Fast of the meal on the go. Don't ask me why a marketing company did all the work to make the formulas and product and give it to another company to market, but we did. We had a feed business, and because we fed animals, we thought we knew the animal side of the food industry. We got into pork production and layers, egg production. Beyond that, we had some interesting R&D folks who found some very novel properties of milk, particularly milk from mothers of newborn cows, which was highly nutritious. And we created a pharmaceutical company. We launched that company as an IPO, as a public company, and it was very successful, treating, before there was the drugs we have now for AIDS patients, treating the wasting syndrome of AIDS patients. We had in the upper Midwest, because we were still taking in milk to make cheese and butter, a direct store delivery business of drinking milk, gallons of milk, that had a fleet of trucks in 7 states in the upper Midwest. I could go on, but I won't. We had gotten relatively big by 2005, $5 or $6 billion in sales. But we had gotten big by collecting a lot of businesses. And we were operating fundamentally as a holding company. We were really a collection of small companies. and we were experiencing a crisis of control. We couldn't capitalize the growth of these businesses, and corporate center didn't do much but tax the businesses, frankly. We did some raising of capital. We did some investor relations. We did some coordination of adding up the numbers and some loose advice around strategy, but we really didn't add value to the businesses. So 2005, we were struggling. And if the simple story is we were unfocused in lots and lots of businesses, we were undisciplined because they were all run as a series of small companies. We were undisciplined because every financial commitment we made to go borrow money from the bank or promise our owners a return, we missed. And most importantly, we were financially weak and not investing in growth in what I believe is one of the greatest growth industries of our era, the need to double food production between now and 2050. So we were struggling and on our road to failure. So as a leadership team, literally in my first few meetings as a newly minted CEO, I put up this slide and I put up that slide. And I said, what are we going to do about it? If we're unfocused, undisciplined, and financially weak, and worst of all, we're not investing in growth, meaning we're falling behind companies who are, what are we going to do? And the answer was pretty easy. Well, we're going to build focus around fewer, bigger businesses. We're going to somehow build discipline to be able to make a commitment and hit it. We're going to perform financially to make our partners, our bankers, and our owners happy. And if we're successful with all that, we'll have permission to invest in growth. Okay, pretty obvious. Build focus, build discipline, build financial performance, build capital to invest in growth. How are we going to do it? Here enters strategy. And I've got Dilbert up there, one of the great strategists of our era. And it's a little bit of a joke because it wasn't quite this simple, but we already knew a little bit of the answer. We were fairly unfocused. We were in lots of businesses. As my mother would say, jack of all trades and master of none. There was no rhyme and reason to these businesses. Some were branded, value added. Some were commodity. Some were in live animal production, a very particular business. So we turned to Dilbert and we said, how do you sort this out? Why don't we look at where we make all of our money? And we found a really interesting thing. We made all of our money and more, which means the rest of these businesses lost money, in 3 businesses: food, feed, and crop inputs. And within those businesses, we made most of the money in the most value added, in the most branded items. And when we talked to our customers about what they'd really miss from us, they really wouldn't miss that 2-share of market sweet with flavorings business. They wouldn't miss that aseptic co-pack business. They wouldn't miss the animal production businesses because we were really lousy at it. But they'd really miss us in food, feed, and crop inputs at the most value-added levels. Consumers would miss our ability to drive insights and innovation in our dairy products. Pretty basic, more typical. In our feed business, Purina, we found that animal lovers would really miss us if we didn't bring the latest science around building better animals, animal nutrition. And we found in crop inputs we were becoming the vital partner to farmers, not so much in what we sold them, seed and crop protection products, but because we were becoming the trusted, independent consultant around precision agriculture. We said, Dilbert's pretty smart. He's directed us to something in our corporate DNA that's a strength. We're a marketing company. Back to 1921. In spite of all this stuff we brought in our corporate DNA, we still had the guts of being a marketing company. Listening to the marketplace, understanding consumers and customers, driving insights from them into product-based innovation and services that they valued. So we sold everything else. We exited everything else. And it was a tough couple of years. Paid down some of the debt, that was good. Unwound some difficult partnerships, that was hard. But today, our 3 business units are back to the future. 1920, 25. Food, Land O'Lakes branded dairy products. All sold through warehouse delivery, not through direct store daily delivery. strong muscle around driving consumer insights into product-based innovation. A butter that spreads. A butter that has half the saturated fat, half the calories, half the cholesterol. How about a range of school food service products that are healthier? Less fat, less salt. That business didn't exist a few years ago. It's one of our fastest growing and most profitable. Insights around what was needed in schools, some of the new regulation, but using our technology to make those healthy products taste good. And on B2B sales and food, insights around what other customers, particularly global growth customers, need to grow their brands in overseas markets. I'll come back to that. In animal feed, we are probably the best in the world at young animal nutrition and horse nutrition. We're putting all of our effort around those two areas, driving value-added branded products that command much higher pricing in the marketplace because they deliver much better value to the owners. And by the way, along for the ride is a whole bunch of other commodity products because we have a reputation as being a trusted partner. And the most spectacular of our business units is this group called Winfield Solutions, which is really a high-end consulting company. We discovered that farmers need agronomic advice on how to grow things, but more importantly, need fact-based agronomic advice for their climate, for their soil, for the way they want to farm. We took this little business and expanded it based on stepping into the void that was created by land-grant universities when their funding stopped around their test programs in the country. These little plots you see with all the signs when you drive through rural America, those used to be owned by universities. They're not anymore. They're largely ours. But we now have a big data company that can tell factually any one farmer in America what will work in their soil, in their climate, for the way they want to farm. Do they want to be the most technologically aggressive and use the latest biotech products to drive a lot more production on a limited soil footprint with less water and more benign crop inputs? It's a new technology. Got to figure out how to use it. We'll show you. Do you want to niche the market? Do you want to grow a boutique crop? Do you want to grow organic? We'll show you how to do that. Or do you just want to do something a little better than you did last year? We'll give you agronomic advice. More importantly, we'll give you economic advice. We're a wholesaler in this space by and large. So we have all of the vendors, the pure science companies' products to sell. Pioneer, DuPont, Syngenta, Monsanto. But we're an independent broker of what works best for you. We'll give you that agronomic advice. We'll marry that with economic advice of how to buy the cheapest and best combinations. And increasingly, we'll give you advice around sustainability that goes something like this. Because we've got data around what works in your soil and your climate for the way you want to farm, we'll say, don't put on all that expensive crop input at the beginning of the year, just put on what you need. We'll monitor the health of your crop. And because we've got a big data muscle, we'll take clippings of that crop throughout the year. We bought a French satellite company to image that crop as it grows, the biomass, and we'll tell you if it's sick, or if infestation comes, or if it's stressed because there's too much or too little rain. And then we'll tell you to put some of those expensive inputs on to keep that crop going. Agronomically, it works. Economically, it's a home run because they're not putting expensive stuff on unless and until it's needed. And from a sustainability standpoint, it's spectacular. You're not putting on more than is needed to grow a crop. So branded, yes. Value added, yes. Insight into innovation, yes. That's what we stand for. We're much more focused, and there's now a common theme running through all three of these businesses. And by the way, those businesses themselves, we think, are a competitive advantage. And I'll come back to this in the broader story, but think about this. We're going from a world where resources are relatively abundant to a world where we're going to have to grow 2.5 times, or 2 times more food. We're going to have to double food production between now and 2050. This portfolio that sees the food industry from end to end, we know how to work with farmers on growing things. We know how to work with those involved in animal agriculture to build better animals more efficiently. And we know how consumers and customers think about food. Pretty interesting when you think about the challenge we've got in front of us. If you put on, that's rare. By the way, the food industry structure that's emerged is we have great CPG packaged goods like food companies at this end, General Mills and Kellogg's and others, and they're great companies, but they largely has divested the supply chain. And then we have great agricultural companies, ADM and Cargill, and they're terrific, but they're commodity-driven, low-cost operators. And they bargain with one another for inputs. We're coming to a world where inputs are scarce. Access to raw materials will be very important to branded food companies. And aligning with farmers to increase their production in a more sustainable way is going to become vital. So we like this portfolio. It's rare. Not many companies see the food industry end to end. When you put on top of it that we're farmer-owned, our system talks to pretty much all the farmers in America. We know what they think. We work with them every day. And if you put on top of that, for 40 years, we've been doing global development. And I won't go into this too much, but as part of our rural values 40 years ago, our farmer owners said, we know a lot about growing food. We believe in helping out our neighbors. Let's define our neighborhood as the world. We've been doing food infrastructure development in food insecure parts of the world, 80 different countries, over 300 projects, working with smallholder farmers, Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Asia, Africa, showing them how to grow things. When you put all that together, we start to think our portfolio is pretty interesting. The businesses themselves are good businesses, but the combination of these businesses gives us a distinct view on the marketplace and some distinct opportunities. So what I'm describing here is a very different strategy, much more focused, fewer bigger businesses, common theme, value-added branded. Different structure is needed, right? We don't have all those businesses. We don't have to operate as a holding company. We can become an operating company and centralize and standardize a lot of things for lower cost and better capability. So in the old days, we had all those businesses I described. Everybody had their own accounting group. We had 13 different ERPs. We had lots of redundant expenses. And by the way, the talent we recruited was the talent that a small company would recruit, not a big company. So as we made this pivot to become a more focused company, fewer bigger businesses, we said it unlocked the opportunity, that's a different strategy, it unlocked the opportunity to structure differently, to create a strong corporate center that supported the businesses. We have one accounting group, we have one IT group. Believe it or not, we have one supply chain group that runs all of our manufacturing. We understand food is different than feed, is different than crop inputs, but the processes are the same. We have a very strong CMO. And the divisions, their jobs didn't get any smaller, but now instead of spending 8 hours a day thinking about customers and consumers and closing the books and what kind of IT system I was going to buy and so on, they think exclusively about customers, consumers, and competition. And they rely on a strong corporate center who now can provide all of those backbone support services better, faster, and cheaper. And when I say better, faster, and cheaper, the cheaper part is where we started. Remember back to the story of financial trouble? We needed money. And as we consolidated these activities, we stripped a lot of cost. Big numbers, over $100 million a year in lower costs almost instantly. To do what? To reinvest against consumers, customers, and competition in building our capability. And that's the next point. Different strategy, different structure, operating company with strong sales and marketing focused divisions, needed a different talent base. And this is probably the hardest thing I had to do. This was a company that had a 90-some-year heritage. But when we looked at the talent we had against the business we were describing, there was a disconnect. This was a very focused, value-added, branded business in 3 areas that was fundamentally insight-driven. Some of our employees had that skill set, but candidly, most of them didn't. Beyond that, the operating company model, and this is not brain surgery, it's not that a lot of companies have this model, but it's very different. It requires a high degree of teamwork and trust. If you're running a food or feed or crop inputs business and your manufacturing is being done centrally, they better make the stuff for you. on time, to spec, at cost. It requires a different kind of employee that can team. So, part of our journey, holding company, operating company, generating the capability for growth, was to restaff the organization. And over a 10-year period, it's pretty much all new. Some of this is natural attrition. 10 years is a long time, so you lose 2 or 3 or 4% just through natural attrition and retirement. But we actually had to go in and very, very aggressively rotate talent out, or we weren't going to survive. And by the way, we wanted to do that in a way that didn't show up on the front page of the newspaper. We thought that would be way too disruptive. So we did it over time. We did it in a way that helped people get on to their next job. I used to say, we have a right-handed short reliever, great athlete in that job, but we need a downhill skier. We need to go find them a baseball team. At the same time, we're recruiting that downhill skier. And that was how we rotated this talent out without tearing the fabric of our organization and pretty much have an entirely new workforce. What's the performance? So turn forward to today. Pretty good. So since 2005, we've doubled sales from whatever that is, 5, 6, 7 billion to over 15. I can tell you by the end of next year, 12 months from now, we'll be close to 18 and well on our way to the 20s. So we continue to grow top line. Earnings have grown faster than sales. Our owners are happy because our dividend to them is up even faster than earnings, and they deserve a dividend. And the metrics on our performance versus our benchmark, we have a target return on equity of 18%. You can see we're actually a little stronger than that. I'd like to knock it down just a little bit. So this strategy of more focus, more discipline to build financial strength has worked. And the most important number that you don't see up there is our investment in growth that went from essentially zero in the 2005 era where we were, those headlines, we were struggling financially. We were frankly burning the furniture to go deliver earnings. We now invest in growth each year more than we make. So in a decade, with greater focus, greater discipline in the operating company, we've built performance, we've built financial strength, and we're investing in growth. So right now, we've got about 10,000 employees, 50 states, 60 countries. We're number 203 on the Fortune 500. We touch most ag producers in the country one way or another, but we do business in some serious volume with about a quarter of the farmers in the U.S. that represent about half the acreage. We have about 290 facilities in the U.S. Something else happened along the way, though, that was a lot stronger, frankly, than the strategy that I've just described. And it was this. In fact, we heard this on a college campus when we were recruiting, and all of us said, boy, that's a pretty powerful statement. Because let's be honest, we're not a pure play company, right? We have 3 groups: food, feed, and crop inputs, Land O'Lakes, Purita, and Winfield Solutions. I like that portfolio. As I said, it's different, and that's the essence of strategy. How are you different than your competition? But we're not pure play. We're on a college campus, and one of the folks we were recruiting said this to us. Oh, I get it. Not quite these words. You're all about helping farmers grow more food in an increasingly productive and sustainable way to feed hungry people. The light bulb went off for us. And we said, wow, that is what we do. So since those words have evolved, and in fact, I was with a group just yesterday who've taken them one step further. They're getting better and sharper. But we marry this strategy with purpose, and we really think we're halfway through our journey. We can double our company again in just the next couple of years. And by the way, the doubling of our company will be less about growing food, feed, and crop inputs, and more about growing enterprise customers in foreign markets, overseas markets, who want to do business with us in all 3 businesses. So one of my best examples, and frankly, it's a strategic weakness of us right now, most of our growth, most of our company has been U.S., domestic. And you can't play in food and agriculture unless you're a global company, right? So you look at us, if you were a strategist, and if you spent a day looking at us, you'd say, geez, you've got a weakness. You're not developed overseas. But now think about our next chapter of growth and think about our portfolio. And think about companies like Nestle. So Nestle's been around for 150, 200 years, and they're a really good branded company. And what they've been doing for their lifetime, different than us, is commercializing their branded goods in lots of different countries. So where are they focused right now? And we think about 7 other interesting customers. Asia, it's a great growth market. They're going to have their brands there. Africa. Are they going to be successful? If you talk to the executives at Nestle and any of the 7 companies I'm thinking of course they are. It may take them a little longer. They might be a little quicker, might be more expensive, might be less expensive. They will be successful at commercializing their brands in these great growth markets. That's what they do. Frankly, they're really good at it. They're a lot better at it than us. We aren't a global company. What are we good at? Do you think that's relevant to Nestle's supply chain in country? Absolutely. What does the CEO of that company go to bed and worry about at night? Well, somewhere near the top of the list is, am I going to have enough safe, abundant, meaning low cost, raw materials in my growth markets to put into my brands? Because if I don't have abundant, I'm going to be too expensive for the marketplace. And if I don't have safe just once, my brands get tarnished. Do you think they like us when we go in and get to know them? They love us. We start out with our food business. We sell them some very basic dairy proteins. More detail than you want. You make butter. You get a dairy powder that's high in protein that's very useful in food production. We get to know them. And then along the way, we say to them, geez, we observe that you've got a pretty broad network supply chain, lots of farmers, all shapes and sizes. We're a farmer-owned company. We know how to talk to farmers. In fact, did you know that we're pretty much expert in driving productivity in animal agriculture through Purina, and in crops, we can show any farmer how to grow more stuff in their soil and their climate for they want to farm. Would that be useful for us to drop into your supply chain? We go from a vendor selling them a raw material to a strategic partner instantly, helping them solve one of their most difficult issues in their best growth markets. That's the next chapter, and that's why I say we love our businesses, but that complex portfolio that's different, and on a bad day, gives me some gray hair, because we do have food, feed, and crop inputs. We do have 3 different sets of customers. We do have 3 different sets of competitors. But if the essence of strategy is how you're different than the guy you're competing against, we're real different than somebody who's just trying to sell a dairy protein, aren't we? We're real different from somebody just selling a bag of feed to a farmer in China. We go through the front door. We go through the branded goods company, if you will. And we've pretty much de-risked our global growth. We have built-in customers. Exact magnitude of how big it will be, we're figuring that out. Exact cost to play, we're figuring that out. But this thing is moving at lightning speed, and it's why I say I think we can double our company again. So real quickly, let me describe the challenge, because I think it's relevant to both our strategy and our purpose. There are the numbers I mentioned before. Got to increase global production by 70%. 12% more arable land, half of which can be brought into production. We've already got a water crisis. We in this rich country don't know it. Maybe if you live in California the last couple of years, you feel it. But if you're in the rest of the world, you're gravely concerned about water. We will double food production between now and 2050. We'll do it the hard way or the easy way. Can we do it? I think there is an easy way, and that's allowing farmers to continue the great untold productivity story of the past 2 generations. So this chart just measures inputs to outputs of agriculture. The horizontal line is the value of all inputs. So it's land, labor, capital, seed, fertilizer, crop protection products, everything that you need to do to grow a crop or an animal. The upward sloping line is the value of all output, the value of dairy, crop, and livestock. Flat inputs, outputs are up 2.5 times. A little bit of a longer time frame, but we basically have doubled food production in this country in 2 generations. By the way, in our most productive crops, this is a little bit of a busy chart, but this just maps corn production in the US back to the 30s. We're growing 6.5 times more corn on 13% fewer acres. 6.5 times more corn on 13% fewer acres. Great productivity story. I bet you didn't know it. That's a problem, by the way. Farmers talk about this among themselves. They talk about yield per acre. It's a great productivity story. It's a great output story. This food feeds hungry people. By the way, that's a political stability story. It's a great economic growth story. I had McKinsey estimate the value of the productivity that we've got in this country that yields the safest, lowest cost food supply in the history of mankind, right here, right now, and the safest, lowest cost food supply of any country in the world, right here, right now. We pay something like 8% of disposable income for our food, and that includes food away from home. The global average is 18% plus or minus. That delta is nearly $2 trillion of stimulus, if you will, to the US consumer. So it's a great economic stimulus story. None of you know this. By the way, it's a great sustainability story. Anybody want to talk sustainability? We're growing 6.5 times more stuff with 13% less land. That means less water, less of everything. I bet none of you know that. It's not your fault, it's our fault. Those of us in the food industry and agribusiness haven't told the story in consumer language. This is a problem because what drove this are 2 fundamental things. Farmers got bigger. One family farmer bought out the next and got bigger. Why? They were better at it. Maybe they were better farmers. Maybe they're better business people and marshaled a balance sheet to buffer the cycle in agriculture. Maybe just from a family standpoint, their kids went off to Notre Dame and decided to be a doctor or a lawyer or a business guy and didn't come back to the farm. But the consolidators' kids came back to the farm. But farms got bigger, and because of that, they could employ modern business practices to drive productivity versus just hard work. They could employ capital to drive productivity versus just hard work. By the way, they're still family farms. Large farms aren't hatched. Large farms got big because they were successful small farms. The second thing that drove this was technology. Farmers are the original entrepreneurs. And they are ruthless in how they adapt and adopt to new technology. They'll throw it out instantly if it doesn't drive productivity, it doesn't work. But everything from mechanization and harvesting to today's biotech seeds. 2 things drove this great productivity story, this great sustainability story, this great economic stimulus story, and this great feeding the hungry story. Size and technology. Yet, you know what? If you talk to society right now, and shame on us, big is bad. Not just in agriculture, but kind of in everything. But big farming is bad. And I want technology in everything that I have except my food. Yet go back to the productivity story. 6.5 times more corn on 13% fewer acres, driven by modern practices because farms got bigger, more professionally managed. We're able to use capital, not just hard work, and the adoption of safe, proven technologies. We've got a discussion going on around our food industry that on one hand is great. Consumers want to know where their foods come from. That's terrific. Here's the irony. Farmers have been so productive in that same timeline of going from flat inputs and 250% outputs, 2 generations. We went from a society where 1/4 of America farmed, 1/4 of America farmed. So if you had a question about farming, where your food came from, you talked about it at the dinner table. You asked a trusted aunt or an uncle or a neighbor, and you trusted them. They were your family, they were your neighbors. They were farmers. There were 25% of them, 1 in 4. Farmers have been so successful driving this productivity. Guess what the number is today? 1.4%. Wow. So we're sitting here with one of the grand challenges of our society, nearly doubling food output in the next 35 years, with the confidence that it can be done if farmers are allowed to do the same things they've done in the past, use modern business practices, continue to gain scale and technology of all shapes and sizes, safe and proven, to drive output, which is sustainability. 2% of America farms, so nobody knows where their food comes from. Farmers talk among themselves about productivity in productivity language, not consumer language. And we've got a real discussion going on right now. And it's got to get better. There are no bad actors. But the reality is, the discussion in food is often what's on the slide. I want food with no technology in it. Or I want food only from small farms. Or I want food based on a certain production technique. And our discussion in food has to get more robust, it has to be more inclusive. And those of us in the food industry need to start to talk about the food industry in consumer language, which is one of the reasons I'm here today and one of the reasons I'm talking about this. Because the solution is pretty simple. We need to change and this debate that's like this, to a debate that's more inclusive. You know, the reality is we need large farms that rapidly adopt technology and produce a lot of safe food at low cost. You know what? We need small farms too. Why? Keep rural communities vibrant. Large farms need a place to send their kids to school. They need a vet. They need a place to go see a movie on the weekend. They need rural communities. And rural communities are kept vibrant by small farmers. By the way, we need small farmers to be the incubators of the next great technology that gets pushed up the ladder to the bigger farms. It's not that way right now, but it will be. We need small farms to be the ones who are pounding on the pure science firms' front door and saying, give me an output trait, a new biotech seed that cures a disease condition. I'm a small farmer, I read the newspaper. We had a problem with diabetes in America. Can you give me a crop that's somehow a boutique crop, large farmers can't grow, that treats that? So we need large and small. We need lots of technology of all shapes and sizes, not the technology we just know today that's being deployed at scale at big farms, but lots of this emerging technology. And we need lots of different production techniques. I don't have any problem with organic food. I'm a capitalist. I believe in markets. I believe in market segmentation and differentiation. And in rich countries like the United States and developed Europe, I don't mind that food is fashion. It's terrific. I do mind if we start to define food as good food and bad food based on production technique, and we limit choices for farmers, particularly farmers in poor countries, to drive their own productivity story. So we need to be more honest about the food we eat. I'm all for market segmentation. I'm all for the fact that we can choose to buy a BMW and that there are Toyotas available too. Both are transportation, both are effective. In food, we got to be really careful, though, as we segment and differentiate and create really interesting products that are high margin, that we don't make them good food versus bad food. They're different food. I think organic's terrific because it keeps a lot of small farmers in business. It's higher margin. And that's a placeholder for the time that will come when those small farmers are using a different technology to produce. But the debate has to get a lot richer, and that's where I'll pretty much end my conversation. Given who we are and our business strategy and this emerging purpose that's really supercharged our business performance and put us in position to take this next step, I find that we're in a lot of different places. We're not just talking to our usual customers. The picture in the upper left is me and a woman named Abigail. Abigail is in Rwanda. And why I'm so opinionated about the fact that we can't impose a rich country's view on small farmers is folks like Abigail. Abigail saw her husband killed in front of her eyes 20 years ago in Rwanda. She was left with nothing and 5 children. She's an amazing woman. Through an interpreter, just 2-3 weeks ago, she said to me, you know, I never was going to come back to this farm. Bad memories. But I had to. I had 5 kids, and I didn't know anything else. I didn't have anything else. And I met Land O'Lakes through your global development program, where we had USAID dollars, and the State Department, United States, was building that country back after the genocide. We gave her a cow and showed her how to use it. Showed her how to be a dairy farmer. She didn't know. Her husband was the farmer. She was successful. She got good at it, and guess what? She bought another cow with the proceeds of the first. She named that cow, interestingly enough, Land O'Lakes. She was very proud to tell me that. She was so appreciative. So we had a cow named Land O'Lakes in Rwanda. But if you turn the story forward 20 years, she's really one of the best businessmen I've ever met. She's brilliant. She's gone through this cycle of cows having cows and selling them to their neighbor. She's improved her productivity by adding modern business practices and capital. She borrows some money to get a little bit of scale to buy 3 or 4 cows and then to sell the offspring. We've shown her how to grow crops that use some technology that are right for her part of the country, so she's more productive. Guess what she did with the proceeds of selling those cows? She bought some more land. She's very proud of that. She still has a little mud hut, but as far as you can see, that's her land. She grows a crop on it with some technology we transferred. And here's the punchline. She's training 50 of her neighbors to do what she did. And I said to her, who's paying you for that? And she looked at me, she didn't understand my question. She said, nobody's paying me for that. I'm doing it for my neighbors. Pretty cool story. But we have to be careful not to impose our view of food production systems on her and deny her the chance for her own great productivity story. So that's one place our crazy business takes us. By the way, it is part of what informs us to this purpose that we've got. Other places, I'm up there with Goldie Gopher and groundbreaking talent. It's one of the reasons I'm here today. Our controlling issue as a company and one of our greatest needs as an industry is to bring in the best and brightest to help us with this grand challenge of growing food by nearly 100% in the next 35 years. I'm an optimist that we can do it. Modern practices and technology. I can't tell you which modern practices or what technology. We need you to help solve that. This is a high growth business, probably the best growth business that I know of our era. It's driven by technology. It's entrepreneurial, it's global, it's got a lot to offer. So we're spending a lot of time talking about this industry in places like this. By the way, it takes us to some policy discussions, kind of on the bottom line there, the bottom row there. We're in Washington, D.C. a lot, talking about policy. One of the things that, and we're owned by farmers, not every day, but we have enjoyed our great productivity story because we've had wise policy coming out of our legislators and regulators in Washington, D.C. for generations. That policy has been fact and science-based. And not every day do we like it, as I started to say. Every once in a while, it's not quite to our farmers' liking, but in aggregate, it's been very wise. And it's been fact and science-based. Go back to my 98%, 2%, though. We're seeing a lot of policy that's based on nostalgia. Geez, I want all my food from the Red Barn on the Hill. That's not going to feed the planet. That's not going to be a sustainability story. That's going to chew up more land and water. 98%, 2%. I don't like technology. We might have legislation that's pro or anti-technology. So we spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill and with regulators talking about this great challenge, the opportunity, and the need to continue the growth story, the productivity story that we in the developed countries, particularly the U.S., have had. Let me shift to the last bit of my presentation. That's our strategy. That's how strategy plus purpose has really supercharged our business performance through getting our employees excited about our business. And a little bit of why this grand challenge is, I think, is so relevant to all of you potentially to consider food and agriculture as a career. Career advice from me. 3 quick things. I believe skills determine success. You have to be a continuous learner, and soft skills matter. These are easy points, so I'm going to go quickly. So my career, I would have never thought that I'd be standing in front of you today as CEO of a Fortune 200 company with 10,000 employees that has a global footprint. My career started as a finance grad out of Notre Dame, taking a job in finance at a manufacturing facility from General Foods. It took me to Metro New York, where I worked in more traditional corporate finance jobs. That took me to another company where I worked in corporate strategy for the office of the chairman. Learned some really interesting things there about the business, but most interestingly is this guy was not that different than I was. I had a view that anybody who was a chairman of a company must be a superhuman being, and I discovered he was a great guy. He was smart, but he was just a guy. From there, I went back into an operating group in Chicago with Kraft and did more finance and M&A. And along the way, they said, boy, we like what you're doing in finance, but if you want to have career progression here, you need to take a risk because everybody who runs this company has had a marketing background, so we want you to go into marketing. Went into marketing, had a good run there. This was an era where the food industry was consolidating. We were going through some different ownership structures. I chose to leave, ended up at a couple of different companies where I basically ran P&Ls. I wasn't quite a general manager, but I had full P&L responsibility and influenced manufacturing as well as sales, marketing, and R&D, and the other functions. And that led me to when Pillsbury was in play with General Mills to take a job at Land O'Lakes, which had called me along the way and said, we're interested in succession. We need to bring in some outside talent. No promises, but if you came in here and did a good job in a few years, we'll probably have a new CEO and you may be in position to read for the part. My first reaction is, boy, that's crazy. They're a farmer-owned company. I don't want to go work for them. I looked at them a little deeper and I said, they got a great brand. They got a great business system. They're a little bit unfocused, but if we clean that up, there might be something there. I didn't know the size of the challenge until I got in, but it's been pretty much what I expected. My point in all of that is don't think of the career ladder as a ladder. That chart on the right is supposed to be a jungle gym. Think of it as a jungle gym. This notion that there's tidy, orderly progression in your career probably isn't going to happen, and it's probably not the best way to manage your career. My story is my story, but I suspect most of you are going to have similar stories. Don't be afraid of that. The enabler of this, though, when you're on a ladder, it's pretty straightforward. You do what the person in front of you on the ladder did, right? When you're in the jungle gym, you have to tend to your own career, and that's my message here. No one will care about your career as much as you do. That's not a mean statement, it's just real. So engage. Ask for feedback. How am I doing? Talk about what you like and where that might lead you in your company. Talk openly about where the company's going. You aren't going to be the CEO day one, in all likelihood, but every once in a while put on the CEO's hat and say, I wonder what that person's thinking about. Find them and ask him or her. Start to align your career experiences with what the company or your industry or your interest align with. Be willing to take a risk. But manage your career actively because it's very different in the jungle gym than the ladder. You have to tend to your career aggressively. Secondly, around continuous learning. Continuous learning is in part what I just described, the jungle gym. If you're a finance person, take a job in operations. If you've had all domestic experience, go overseas. It also means what you do outside of the company. And this is just a list of things that I've been involved in over the recent past. Doesn't have much to do with today's business, but it has everything to do with continuous learning. Soft skills matter. This is a simple point. There's a lot of ways to display this, but I hope you take me seriously. This is a slide about communication skills. And the punchline is that little sliver of 10% is content. 35% is vocal, the words you choose, the tone you use. 55% is physicals, your body language. There's a lot of different charts I could have shown to make this point, but you're coming out of a world of content. Don't forget the soft skills. I can't tell you how many times at Land O'Lakes and in my career we've said, that person's terrific, but they can't work with a team. From a content standpoint, they're brilliant, but we could never send them to see a customer. Soft skills count. Work on them. Work on them hard. Because I don't know if it's 90-10, but it's a huge portion of your future success. Last slide I've got before Q&As is leadership expectations. This is an easy one for me, because this is legitimately the leadership expectations we have with Land O'Lakes. We use it when we recruit. We use it when we onboard every new employee, and I try and meet every new employee in a half-day onboarding session. And we use it twice a year to evaluate every employee in our company, all 10,000 of them. I don't do all 10,000, I do my team, but right through the hierarchy. Pretty simple list. I'll go through it quickly because it's simple. Act with integrity. That doesn't mean don't cheat, steal, and lie. Of course, you shouldn't do that. It means have integrity in your interactions. If you make a mistake, say you're sorry. If you're putting together a business plan and you're the newly minted financial analyst and the group leader makes his plan by cutting an investment in quality and you're an organization that stands for quality, you need to have a conversation. You need to say, you know what? This plan doesn't have integrity. The numbers add up, but the way we got there doesn't work. By the way, word to the wise, show up with a solution. There's a better way to do it. We can trim that, we can do this. But act with integrity means having integrity in all of your interactions. Sometimes that means tough conversations. Demonstrate thought leadership. Every employee at every level needs to be a thought leader. The temptation for employees, particularly employees that join an organization, is look up in the organization and say, I wonder what our strategy is, and we're going to wait for the CEO or the CEO's team to tell us what to do. That may have been true at one point in time. It is not true anymore. Shape the future. If you're in charge of closing the books, what's the latest and greatest way to close the books? Demonstrate thought leadership at all functions, at all levels, and at all times. Not just running today's business, but thinking at the long term, about the long term. Leverage talent. This one I'll be really short about. It's recruit your friends and play nice in the sandbox. We don't get anything done today on our own. We get it all done in teams. The last point is one that, at least within Land O'Lakes, was controversial, where we said, performance counts. Deliver results. That's one of our expectations. If you say X, we expect you to deliver X. You're not going to have to bat 1,000. There's reason to have a plan and miss it. Something unexpected happened. Competition came. Those are good reasons. What did you learn? What are you going to do next? There are bad reasons to miss a plan. It was a poorly thought through plan. I came in late. I was lazy. Those are bad reasons. But deliver results is really, really important. And it surprised me because we were experiencing some success along the way and this purpose was emerging. And I was hearing, well, we don't have to worry about this year's results because we've got a good strategy and we've got a good purpose. We only have permission to execute against the strategy and permission to go after a higher order purpose if we're delivering in the short run. That's one of the tests of the marketplace. Are you credible? Are you capable? By the way, make honest commitments and then meet them. And the commitment itself is important, but how you get it is important. You can't do it in a way that's short term. You can't do it by running roughshod over your peers or the organization or cheating to get there. But you have to deliver results, and when you don't, talk about what you learned, what you're going to do next. Anyhow, that is the end of my prepared comments. I hope you enjoyed the strategy and purpose part and a little bit of the career part at the end. I think we've got 15 minutes or so for questions, and I'd love to take any questions you've got.
Thank you. So I have two questions. The first is, when you came in 2005, were you feeling the pressure or were you confident in your product? And the second is talking about this conversation with students. So, I'm yet to meet a student who said, I'm going to go into the agricultural business. I'm sure that doesn't mean that there aren't any, but how do you take the focus maybe away from more traditional job routes and maybe give students that that way forward?
Yeah, the first part, I was feeling the pressure. Our whole company was feeling the pressure because we weren't performing. I mean, if you looked at our financial ratings, they were sliding down from investment grade to the lowest level of junk, and we really were colorfully burning the furniture to hit financial targets. That was pressure. Our owners were not happy, so our meetings with our shareholders were tense. We expect a return and you haven't given it. The liberating part was we did have that burning platform. And when we didn't, I made it seem a little bit more like the burning platform because we clearly had a need for change. So yes, there was pressure. We had to deal with that. We had to do some things. We had to sell some businesses quicker than I might have liked to pay off some debt. We did some things to deal with that pressure, but it was also liberating. We had permission to change. We hadn't performed very well, so to be honest with you, when we set a plan, we set it at a level that we knew we could hit and meet and restore credibility. So we were relatively conservative. So there was some liberation in the challenge, but it was a challenge overall. The second part of your question is, how do you stay focused on the big strategies in spite of the little things? You make it a priority. I think that there are some things structurally you can do to separate highly urgent things from highly valuable things, because some of the most valuable things you forget about when a big customer calls and says, come see me tomorrow, I'm not happy. You tend to forget about that. But we talk about a series of short-term performance metrics that ladder up to our longer-term metrics. We try and focus on both. Now, structurally, we do have a corporate group that really stays focused on some of the bigger innovations and the disruptive technologies that are coming that I really don't want in the business groups because they have to make and sell cases today, and vice versa. So we do some things to try and separate that. But we talk a lot about the importance of doing both. You can't focus on one or the other. You have to deal with performance in the short run. And you have to make sure you're periodically stepping up and saying, where are we going? And are all these things putting us on that path? Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. Going back to what you were saying about the good versus bad, big versus small, it seems to be that a lot of the problem that people see from a consumer standpoint is they're saying, good is organic, bad is large produced, GMO, stuff like that, and that it's a product integrity standpoint. So how, as a marketing company, do you guys foresee getting, maybe educating the consumers or changing that consumer sentiment?
You just said it. I think there's some short-term battles and a longer-term war to enrich the debate, to get the discussion around food to be more fact and science-based versus opinion and nostalgia-based. But we have to get into an education mode. There are no bad actors in this movie. There really aren't. Agriculture and the food industry has for years resisted the fact that consumers want to know more about their food and where it comes from. I think that's fantastic. Now we have to develop the skills, the language, the tools to be able to communicate the things we're doing and why they're good. We also have to be smart enough to listen to what consumers want and why they're saying that, and evolve our practices in a way that makes sense. But I think it is an education issue, and we have to engage. We have to engage outside of our silos. So I go to a lot of different food meetings. Sometimes I go visit with the NGO world, and I'll say to them, when's the last time you talked with the consumer activists about the role of technology in feeding hungry people overseas. And they look at their shoes, and they say, well, never. And I say, shame on you. You should. They're not bad folks, but they don't know how important it is to have new technologies and practices. Okay, great. We have to get out of our side. Farmers, they get together at the coffee shop and they talk about that productivity story. I didn't make that up. I got the guts of it from a farmer and gave it to McKinsey and said, clean it up for me. But they talk about that at the coffee shop among themselves. And they talk about it in farmer terms. My yield per acre. How about if they turned that around and came to their local college campus and said, let me tell you a story about sustainability. And I'm going to start with, I'm a family farmer, I got big, but I want to give this to my grandkids and their grandkids, so I'm really concerned, maybe even more than you, about doing the right thing. Let me tell you how I'm doing that. Come out and visit. Not go to the coffee shop and talk about yield per acre. That's too easy. So we have to enrich this debate. It is too simplistic right now. The discussion about food is shockingly simplistic. And we have to get it much more robust. And the best way to do that is education. Mix it up. Get out of our silos. One of the reasons I'm here today. Thank you for the question. It's a very important question. And by the way, there are no bad actors. I think the temptation is to say, one or the other, them or us. We're all interested in safe, affordable food, right? No bad actors. They're just questions. We have to answer them. Very good question. Yeah?
One of the big things you talked about was technology.
Yep.
One of the big things you talked about was technology. So I wanted to see what you thought were the big things that would move to double the production over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And then specifically, did you ever see anything, the role of drones or anything like that?
The role of
Drones?
Yes.
And what that could do in the future?
Great question. In fact, this Winfield Solutions Group that I didn't go into detail is a big data consulting company. We get paid by selling farmer seed and crop protection products, but we basically go in and we're high-end precision agriculture consultants. We tell them how to grow more with less. Part of that's the technology, part of that's the big data, diagnosing what's in their soil and their climate. I mentioned we bought a satellite imagery company. We may shift to drones, we may not. But that satellite imagery company takes pictures of a crop in real time and measures through special lenses its biomass, so we can tell you its health. So remotely, through remote sensing, might be drones, might be satellites, we are helping farmers grow a lot more food in really precise ways. We get it down to a very small piece of land in their field in terms of what goes on it now, with different rates of application of how many seeds go in that plot and how much fertilizer goes on that plot or how much crop protection product if and when it's needed. Because not all parts of the field are the same. If it's a low part that gets a lot of water, you may not want to put a lot of stuff on that if it's a wet year. It's just not going to grow no matter how much you put on it. Well, don't put much. Put it all on the parts that will remain relatively dry, or vice versa. So I think technology is probably the biggest lever we have to double food production and do it with using less land and less water, not more land and more water, and more benign crop inputs. I think the single best solution to that challenge is technology driven. We have to change the debate though, right? I want technology in everything but my food. We have to get folks to say technology is good. Safe, proven technology, but it's good. It allows us to grow more with less. What's wrong with that? Very important question. Yes.
Obviously, you're very busy being the CEO of a company, but how do you make sure you make time for friends and family outside of that?
My wife, Ann, is here somewhere. Ann, raise your hand. She's not raising her hand. She does. Oh, there she is, right in the center. We probably ought to ask her. It sounds funny, and I actually heard this years ago sitting in your chair at the former business school in the really not so nice building on campus versus this building. There was a CEO who came in and he said, I schedule time because you do get busy, and this job can be 24/7. Almost by definition it is. And in fact, that's not just CEOs. I think that's, pull out your cell phone. You're kind of connected always to everything anyhow. So I think it's deeper than that. And what Ann and I do is we schedule time. We schedule time to do things because I'm good at keeping appointments. And that's one thing we do. Sometimes that means, time where we really physically get away. Sometimes that's just, go out to the local bar and have a beer and a burger. But we schedule times. Good question. And I don't think, by the way, you phrased it as a CEO, I really mean it. I do not think, especially in today's environment, that it's just CEOs. I think everybody has this pressure, and you have to be conscious of balance. And, in the real world, that may not be every day, every week. You may be out of balance for a week or a month or a quarter because there's a big project. But you should keep focused on that because balance over a reasonable period of time, certainly over a lifetime, this is a life, and you need that balance. So, really good question. I think we have time for one more, if there is one. Oh, there is.
So when you identified that you needed different talent, how exactly did you go about identifying and engaging that talent that you thought that you needed, knowing that the talent you currently had might not fit that?
Great question. And in passing, I said, how are we going to weave new talent into our organization without showing up on the front page? The decision we made was to do it in chunks, to not try and do it to do it overnight. So we didn't say we're going to have 80% new employees by January 1st next year. We said, you know what, we're going to have to reinvent this workforce because we have a very different strategy. We have a very different structure. What would lead us to think that the folks who've been involved in the old strategy, the old structure, would be right for this one? So we knew we had to do it. But we started with the basics, and to some degree, the old joke, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? We said, all right, in the first round, we're going to do this. And we seeded some very key positions with new talent, some very key spots in my leadership team. But we were very conscious of a mix of long-tenured employees who kind of knew where the light switch was, and employees who were coming in who had the skills we knew we needed for the next chapter of our journey. We digested that, and we did it again. But the difference is we let this group do more of it because they were closer to what was needed. And then we digested that, and we did it again, and we pushed it one level down in the organization. Said, you tell us what we need. So we took it in chunks. Yes, we did some things that were process-driven. This was hard, but we were such a nice organization that I thought we will never reinvent ourselves because we'll all get together and we'll all be nice to one another, and we're not going to ever reinvent the talent. So we put some hard metrics around numbers. And we put a process in place for performance reviews that really did, as much as we thought we could, force that conversation around, do you have the skill? Are you performing in the short term? And do you have the skills we need for the long term? Yes or no? And if you got two no's, we had to have a different discussion about finding that baseball team for you. So we did some process things to support this, but we did it in chunks. And we spent a lot of time on it. Well, listen, we're out of time. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Both Ann and I appreciate the opportunity to be back on campus. Thank you.
Chris, I want to thank you for basically a Harvard business case study with all the crib notes. That was fantastic. I think it was a learning experience for all of us. Also, we talk about Mendoza, we talk about the power of business for good. I think feeding the planet is obviously in line with that, and impact investing and everything else. So something else to think about, because that's kind of lining with the mantra of Notre Dame's teachings today. So again, thanks, Chris, and I have a little gift for you.